Okay, we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the YAGNI livecast with me, Matt Harrison, and Noah Gift. We are content creators, consultants, professors, and anything else in there?
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners.
Okay, I'm not that, but don't mess with Noah. And so this is what we're calling the YAGNI podcast, where we share brain dumps on various thoughts from data or programming or just consulting or life in general. And so we are live streaming. I think right now we're on LinkedIn and we're on YouTube as well. So if you have any questions or things that you want us to address, feel free to ask them, and we'll try and answer them. So let's get started with just some recap. It's been a while since we've talked. What have you been up to recently, Noah?
So this summer, I was focusing on building two courses for Udacity. I built one on Azure DevOps, and then I also built one with Alfredo on Azure machine learning um, as well. So basically, I spent all summer with Azure in a
Nice.
nutshell.
Are those live right now?
One of them is so. One of them is been out for a bit, like maybe a month, and then the Azure machine learning nanodegree, I believe, is live tomorrow morning. So in theory, you could enter it, and it's pretty interesting because the features that we cover in the machine learning nanodegree are directly linked to the Azure data scientist certification, and also it's basically beta machine learning studio platform stuff. So there's actually a lot of new machine learning technology that really has not been publicly available that we work directly with Microsoft on it that gets released. So if you wanted to be a machine learning engineer on Azure, I believe this is the only game in town in terms of material that's out there.
So cutting edge stuff.
Pretty,
So
yeah, pretty edge.
can you sort of dive into what the nano degree looks like, and if someone's interested in either one of these courses, what is sort of the commitment to it, and to maybe time investment or whatever to work through one of these?
Yeah, the nano degree is about like a semester that's intense at a college. So it would be equivalent to, let's say you took a couple courses in graduate school and it would probably 10 hours a week you would want to spend on a nano degree over 3 months. And then when you're done, you're it's almost like you're carving a topic out. Let's say like you're in a data science program and you only wanted to learn data engineering. That's basically what a nano degree is that you could just ignore all the other things and just study data engineering. Or if you just want to learn machine learning engineering, you could just study that, like take the two courses in the graduate program. So it's essentially like it's like HBO, like you're like,
Mm.
I don't want cable. I just want a little HBO and just want to watch a few episodes. And then at the end, you can build portfolio project. And in theory, I think, and I've heard, actually, I get it all the time. People email me, hey, I took your course and now I got a job as X. And that's what I think the nano degrees are really good at is someone is just wants to pivot and get a job in a new field is probably the straightest line as between A and B is do one of these nano degree type programs.
It's going to give you something that you can list on a portfolio or show directly to a potential employer to have proof that you can do something.
Yeah, and it's like I think the world we live in, it's not the, even if you have a master's degree or two master's degrees or three master's degrees, it doesn't necessarily mean you know technology X. And that is, I think, what is really cool about what's happening in education is that on one hand, it's actually really powerful that you can just say, hey, I'm going to get a nano degree and then pivot, and then you're in this new job. On the flip side, the downside is if you thought that you could get a degree and then just go to sleep for a while, that's not the way the world works.
Yeah. So you're saying it's about a 10 hour a week commitment, more or less, for a few months. Um, is that mostly reading, watching videos, doing work? What's sort of the breakdown there? And then you also said there's a project at the end. How does the project work out? And is there mentoring along the way?
Yeah, there is actually mostly it's hands-on, which I think is what you would like for a nano degree. So you'll do labs. In the case of Azure, you'll literally spawn up the Azure environment, do AutoML, do machine learning pipelines, write Python code that uses their SDK, and then you'll watch videos and follow along and do exercises. And then the mentoring comes in that they have people that are part of Udacity that will look at your projects, look at your work, and give you feedback like, hey, this is what I would change, or this is what I would do differently. So that is actually one thing that is pretty unique about Udacity, is that they do have a built-in peer-to-peer system where former Udacity students can actually help you and actually give you some guidance.
Nice. And are you working on that sort of portfolio project from the start, or is it sort of like the last few weeks you sort of go off
That's
on
the
your own?
last, yeah. At the beginning, in the style that Udacity does, is you just incrementally build up knowledge by doing hands-on exercises, watching videos. Mostly, it's video and labs and quizzes. That's
Hmm.
the breakdown. Not that much reading. There's a little bit of reading, but it's mostly interactive or rich media content.
Cool. So maybe for people who aren't familiar with the Azure stack, you want to give sort of some highlights, some of maybe the pros to an Azure stack. I know you're well versed in various stacks.
Yeah, I think that what I like about Azure is that they they in a sense, because AWS came at this problem first, they're able to revisit some of the things that AWS does. And my experience, all the cloud people copy each other.
Hmm.
And the SageMaker concept, which is just hosted Jupyter for machine learning, they have run with it. And what I like about what they do that's different is they let you register data sets. So this is probably, in particular, something you care about, Matt, is that if you look at pandas, it's not a big data tool, and it's also irritating when you start needing to do machine learning sometimes. And what Azure does is really cool, is that you can take many different sources of data. You can, let's say, take a CSV file, click a button, and it will register the data set. And then once it's registered, you can go to Jupyter anytime you want, and with a couple lines of code, use it and turn it into a data frame. So basically, it kind of is like a almost like a GitHub kind of a thing, but for data.
Hmm.
And then also it'll efficiently use the data. So in the case of pandas, for example, or a traditional flow, you're just constantly making copies and moving it. You're doing where in machine learning, in the Azure platform, because you've registered the data once behind the scenes, it'll just efficiently deal with the data, copy it. It's not going to make like, you know, duplicate the data like 6 or 7 times, like you would do in a regular Jupyter notebook. You're referring to something that's registered once, and then you can also do fancy things to it too, like the AutoML system they have is pretty incredible. Once you've registered a data set, if it's a classification problem, a regression problem, a time series problem, you can just say, hey, I want to do a initial AutoML run, and you just click a button. You say, here's the target column, and it's pretty quick, and it just goes through and does AutoML, and then it gives you a ton of different descriptive interpretation metrics afterwards. It shows you which features led to the model. So I think that what's happening with Azure, in particular is probably the future of machine learning is that sure, you could write code, but why would you write code for 80% of what you're doing? At some point, yeah, write some code, and they have that with their SDK. You can explicitly control the pipeline and steps and run AutoML. But a lot of the initial steps of dealing with data and all the things that are irritating, at least in terms of like moving data around and first exploring it, I think they've got it nailed pretty well.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I like to refer to the quote by Big Data Borat that goes something like 80% of time spent clean data and 20% of time spent complain about clean data. In that, you know, a lot of people, when they hear about data scientists, think, oh, they're making these cool models and they're spending all this time doing the modeling. And to be honest, like making a model in scikit-learn is like 3 lines of code, right? In
Mhm.
in and you have these AutoML tools that are basically able to leverage that and try very different models at the same time and do things a lot more efficiently than you. So yeah, why would you want to spending your time doing that isn't super efficient per se, but knowing how to use those tools and what they represent and what's going on is a useful skill.
Well, also the operationalization, I think, is the other thing.
Sure.
Like one of the things that they have that's a cool tool is this data drift monitoring tool. So let's say you take a traditional CSV file, you check it in, you train a model, and then all of a sudden the data has changed. You could have a second model that you or a second data set you registered, and you could actually set up an alert so that if the delta, if the data is 20% different, then you could automatically trigger a rerun of the machine learning model. And so honestly, the what I see from Azure is they've massively embraced Python. And if you're an expert at Python and you understand how to do notebook programming and all that kind of stuff, it's actually a dream environment because the stuff that's boring and tedious, there's less of it, and you can spend more of your time like essentially working at a meta level. So
Hmm.
you can instead of just training one model, you could train 1,000 models, and then
Yeah.
you could also like look at the status of models. And so really it's actually in a way more programming that you would do than less, but because you're getting a lot more work done. So I am skeptical that the traditional scikit-learn Flask pandas, the way it is now, even makes sense, because I think for the next couple of years the ML platforms like Azure ML Studio are so compelling that it's more like you're in Toyland if you're only using that those skill set. Now, it may make sense, if you're just doing some data science and you're, visualizing it. But if you're trying to run a prediction model, I don't know why you would build all that scaffolding yourself. It's like, you know, running your own data center or something.
Yeah. And my experience and again sample size one here is that a lot of the world runs on Microsoft as much as, you know, geeks and nerds like to show their Apple devices and whatnot. Um, Microsoft still has a stranglehold, more or less, on the enterprise, and and so I think that as people, you have a lot of large companies who maybe are technological laggards, but eventually are going to embrace the cloud, or they will go away, I believe. And
Mhm.
when they do that, or if they haven't already done that, a lot of them will use Microsoft just because it's a safe bet and they're already using those technologies, right? And so,
Yeah, and also there, we don't know what's going to happen in 2021 in terms of technology companies. There's a lot of talk around breaking up technology companies. Seems like, let's just say at least one will have at least a serious threat, maybe more. And the one that seems to be the least controversial, where it used to be the most, was Microsoft. they just seem to be like kind of off the everyone's radar because they're not being jerks.
Yeah.
They're really very well run from an executive level,
And they're
and
reaching
there's
out and working with developers rather than trying to force developers to
yeah,
do what
yeah,
they
and I think
want.
that's a pattern I think we've seen in our lives is that when you're a jerk as a company, you sure for a little bit it works. Eventually, people get though they catch on to you, and you can only have a bad reputation for so long, and then it will come back to haunt you. And I think some companies next year are potentially going to get a little bit of a slap down. That's my guess, but we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, well that sounds awesome. We've got Yana says, "Hey Matt, looking forward to the session and learning a bit." Hi Yana. If you got specific questions, feel free to ask them. We have another comment from Ishan here saying, "Hey, how valuable is a nano degree compared to other courses from Coursera?" So that might be a good question for you, Noah, since you're an expert on both of these things. What's your take on that? How valuable is a nano degree versus a course from Coursera?
Well, I think they're the same thing. It's just marketing terminology. In that, if you look at the state of the nano degrees, the two biggest players right now are Udacity and Coursera. And I even recommend this to graduate students that they take Coursera courses and Udacity courses and do nano degrees and also get certified because why not? In fact, I was talking to a student today, and he was very wise. What he said was, "What I like about certifications is that people just don't do it, and it's just like a box that someone forgot to check." And I think the same goes with nano degrees. Is a lot of times, I think it's easy to get complacent and just say, I don't need that. But it turns out that maybe you do. So I think nano degrees and from either nano degrees or the equivalent from Coursera, are both great, and they're essentially like finishers, right? You can just I think it's just a great product because anytime you want to prove that you know something, you just get an nano degree or get a some the equivalent on Coursera platform and take it. In fact, that's the next thing I'm working on is I'm working on a course with Duke and Coursera called Cloud Computing for Data. And actually, it's essentially the course I teach at Duke in their graduate data science program, but converted into a Coursera course. So it's essentially a similar style. So I have no complaints about either. I think they're both incredible and they can be helpful.
So, as far as like, if I was a student, or say I'm in one of your classes, right, and I go off and take one of these, how do how do I get buy-in from future employers, or what's the technique to sort of like, I don't know, flash that I have these fancy nano degrees?
I think the way you would put it on your resume and you would just like you would put your degree,
Mm-hmm.
and in some cases it might be more valuable. I don't I think it depends, but I think Google just recently said, which is I think their Coursera courses, they said that it's equivalent. They said that they would treat you equivalently for a UX product management position, or I forget, there's two or three positions.
If you
and
had the
and
Coursera course.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, in that case, it's just the same as a degree. And then the other thing would be, so the courses I designed for both Udacity and I'm designing for Coursera. One of the things I'm adding is I'm actually requiring that people create a demo video. And so the reason is that I'm doing that is so that students will then also be able to put on their portfolio like a link to a video. And my opinion is, if you see a resume and it says, "Oh, cool, you have a Udacity certification or a Coursera, certification or slash nano degree," and then there's a link and they can click, and in 3 minutes you show, "Okay, here's how to do machine learning at scale." Click, 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 click. If I'm a hiring manager and I have two resumes in front, and one of them has exactly what you would do and I'm hiring for you to do it and you show me you did it, why do I even need to interview?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point is to, one, to sort of, that's like icing on the cake that you've already invested all this time into doing this course or nano degree. Why not take an extra day and make a video, right, that proves that you can walk through the steps that you've done and also shows that you have some communication skills, which I think are super important, especially now in sort of the work from home type environment that we have. The ability to make a video or talk about what you've done and explain it to someone else, I think is a super useful skill. And so, yeah, I would think that why would you not do that?
Hmm.
Cool. Let's see. We got another question from Russell Willis. He says, in that respect, would you consider nanodegrees or certificates more of a retrospective tool to prove a capability rather than an orthodox preemptive learning training facility?
I think they're actually more of a that they're showing future facing skills. I do have some perspective in here that I am writing books and I'm teaching at universities and I'm creating these nano degrees. At the university level, I do try to keep the material I teach really, um, cutting edge and like just in time. But I would say even in the case of you of a nano degree, a lot of times it's so new, the material you're learning, it's not even possible. It could be in a traditional undergraduate or graduate program. It's really is just in time, and so I think really it's actually shows that a just in time skill, and I think
Yeah.
that's one of the big advantages of it.
Yeah, and maybe to echo on that is just, I think to sort of what we've been getting at in that what is considered data science or machine learning operations today in 2 years might be different given the toolkits that we have. I mean, and similar, this has been always the case with technology in that if you want to seriously leverage technology, uh, you just need to be comfortable like being able to learn and pick up something new. And so to that point, I would say that as much as I would, if I was giving advice to someone who wanted to be a programmer, my advice right now would be to go get a degree. That would be my first advice, just because I think that's sort of the classical way. I think boot camps are a possible another one, but I think it might be that you get a degree and your degree, is whatever teaching you to use Java or you know, some tool that might not be super relevant just because a professor doesn't want to update and they've been teaching it that way for 20 years or whatnot. Whereas something like a nano degree or something like that can be more topical and more timely.
Yeah, the I think the real big gotcha with the way the traditional university system works is that there's upsides to some components which are research topics that are really theoretical are widely covered, and so you would potentially never get access to some of these topics, like if theoretical computer science, theoretical math, all this stuff, because the way that the professors who are tenured faculty or tenure track faculty are rewarded is by doing exotic, bespoke research that may or may not pan out. If you get lucky and the professor's research actually is useful, then it's like you won the lottery because you got to get this really cool research from a professor who just invented the subject. If you're not though, then maybe you just learn some research that may or may not be useful in your career. And so, that's I think it's like saying, hey, I happen to buy Apple when it was $13 a share. Well, awesome. I remember by the way when it was $13 a share. Like, hey, cool, I bought Apple at $13 a share, but like that's not how it always works. And I think you have to have your own plan as well. There's a lot of good things about a university, but you can't 100% bet that everything you learn will be relevant in a couple of years.
Yeah. And there's also just sort of, I would call an impedance mismatch between the goals of a university and the goals of a student. Like, for example, in computer science, the goal of a university teaching computer science is to teach how computers work and get people ready to go on to get master's degrees or PhDs, right, about computer science. I mean, at least that's been my experience. Versus, if you want to be a programmer, those two goals don't necessarily aren't necessarily the same. There's some differences between there. Having said that, like I think that a good safe route currently for someone who wants to be a programmer who doesn't have the motivation to go and learn all these things on their own is to get a degree. Um, okay, I got another question from Yana. She says, if we're talking about just-in-time skills, what is the likelihood that companies have integrated those skills or programs into their organization? And I think that's an interesting question, right? There, what a company integrates or not, I think there are laggards and there are people at the forefront. So I think this is just my take on this. I'll let Noah give his take, but personally, I found that you as an individual need to be responsible for your learning. And if you're at a company where for whatever reason they're laggards or they don't want to use whatever technology, you can try and change that, and perhaps you can, or perhaps that's a ship that's not going to move or that you can't move. But I would say don't be complacent about that getting in the way of your education and your learning. And I would also say this, in and maybe this is cynical, but like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You're the place where you work, their job is not to get you using the latest technology or whatnot. Their job is generally that they have a fiscal responsibility to their shareholders. And that may or may not have anything to do with what tools you use or what education or skills you bring to the table. So don't tie those two together. You need to take ownership in your own uh, skills. Um, so having said that, I will also say that I've done a bunch of training, and like I'm teaching a course at Stanford right now about data analysis, and my experience is that a lot of the best, what I would say the best companies invest in their people because they know that it's better, it has a better ROI, and it's going to impact their bottom line better by investing in them and not just throwing money at them, but also doing things like training and whatnot. So a lot of these companies have whole buildings dedicated to training people and getting them leveled up, and they have time dedicated, however many days or weeks per year, where these people can leverage to get training so that they can improve and they invest in their people. So that I don't know if that answers your question, Yana. I'll maybe let Noah speak to that, and he probably forgot the question. But the question is, if we're talking just in time skills, what's the likelihood that companies have integrated those skills or programs into their organizations?
Say low. I would say that if it's a new technology, the nature of especially software heavy company is that they haven't. And a lot of times as well. Like I remember I was working at AT&T 2010, and I remember I was super gung ho on. I'm always a gung ho on the latest technology, and I remember I was in charge of platform tools team, and I remember I told my boss, I was like, "Hey, we got to use the cloud. This is going to make everything better." And it was just literally like, "Shut up. The cloud sucks, and we're not using it. Go away." and I thought, "Oh, okay." Like, I guess, and it doesn't. He was dead wrong 100%. Not one thing he said was correct. Still, he was the boss, and there's nothing I could do about it. So I think that's the problem with having a job, is that someone will tell you what to do. If you get lucky and it's a very forward-thinking company, they will actually retrain you, and that's awesome. If you're in one of those companies, that's rare. But I think the best strategy is to assume that they won't, and to have your own quarterly goal to upgrade. And now the upside to that is that, because nobody does it, you could easily, just through a little bit of hard work, run circles around people, because nobody is actually learning the latest skills. They only learn the skills when they're about to leave their job. And then they panic and they go, "Uh-oh, I better learn all the new stuff," because their company doesn't allow them to learn. I remember another story. I was working at Turner Studios in Atlanta, Georgia, and I remember I wanted to learn Cocoa programming. And I remember my boss. I told him, "Hey, like, I'd like to take this training course, and it's $3,500 or something at Big Nerd Ranch, which was at the time and the top Cocoa programming course in the world." And then he said, "No, you cannot do this." I said, "Oh, okay, great. By the way, I'm taking vacation next week." He said, "Oh, okay." And I just paid for it myself. Just put down my credit card, boom, $3,500, paid for it. Later, I built actually a six-figure application plus, using the skills I learned from that course. So, my opinion is, don't listen to your boss in terms of what you should learn. Who cares what they say? And in fact, in some sense, you should have your own agenda and spend your own money to get where you need to go. And it's not, at least that's worked for me. Is that many times I've had people tell me, "Just don't learn this, you can't do this," and I think one of the best skills for being at the cutting edge is to distrust the authority in your company, and to assume that they are incorrect about what it is you should know, and take control of your own career.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I generally agree with that, right? Don't tie yourself to your company because their goals are not necessarily your goals, even though HR or other people might say they are. Um, Great comments. I'm not seeing anything else come in, so I don't know if you have any. You've been working on a couple courses. Anything you've got in the pipeline, Noah?
Yeah, so the big thing I'm working on right now is that'll go live February, is Coursera course on cloud computing for data with Duke, which I think will be pretty cool. And then I'm also, I think it's official. It's handshake official that Alfredo Deza and I are going to be working on a book, an ML Ops, machine learning operations book for O'Reilly as well, around the same period of time. So those are probably they'll keep me busy for the next 6 months or so. How
Awesome.
about you?
Yeah, so I've been working pretty heads down the last couple months on building up sort of my own courses. I mean, the past half dozen years I've been doing a lot of corporate training, and one of the common questions that I get just is how do I take advantage of your training. And generally it's like, well, you tell your boss that you want to fly me out there and do that. And so I'm in the process of building up my own catalog of training that is something that, an individual can purchase. And so I've got I've got 4 courses up there right now. So that I'll just I've got a Python for data scientists and engineers course, which is my experience is that most Python courses are aimed at people who want to make websites, not necessarily do data. And so this is aimed at people who want to mess with data and teaching them the skills they need. I've got another one here on pandas, which to my point earlier about big data, Borat, and cleaning data, I think one of the skills that I think is going to be hard to automate away, even with the cloud, is understanding your data. And my experience has been that a lot of data in the wild is not necessarily in a place where you can just throw it, you can just throw machine learning at it as is. You have to do some tweaking to it. And so pandas is one way to do that. And then I did a SQL course as well, which is again, I think a core tool that a lot of data people need to have is SQL. A lot of data is living in SQL. And then just this last week, I did this effective learning course, which isn't really programming related at all. It's more as COVID hit, I realized that things will probably change, and a lot of my live learning probably needs to transition into virtual. And I just sort of doubled down on, investing in tooling at home, but also I doubled down in research and teaching and effective learning. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing things as a teacher that help people learn and maximize their learning, and that my courses are doing the same. And to that end, I made a course about, you know, if you're a student, how do you maximize your learning? So this is not necessarily Python specific at all, or data science specific, but how the brain works, what are the characteristics of the brain, how humans work in general, how to stay focused. If when you get to an impasse, how do you overcome impasses? Tools and techniques from the research on how to overcome those. So that's what I've been working on. Um, right now, like I said, I am starting another course with Stanford, which is always a fun course. It's just a data course where people bring their own data, and I basically walk through doing data analysis and visualization and start them on machine learning. So a lot of people typically who take that course are maybe non-programmers or people who are well versed in Excel and want to basically do what they do in Excel with a programming language. So that's sort of what I've been up to. I am think so on the course thing, thinking about my next course, which I'm 99% sure will be a course on book writing. So I just Python 3.9 came out last week, and so I have, for my training, I have these little books that I hand out to students, just their little physical notebooks that have all the syntax of Python in that. So I updated that for Python 3.9, and I pushed that up to Amazon last week. And I noticed that I have over 24 books that I've published on Amazon over the years. And I've had repeated requests about, how to publish a book or how to write a book. And so I think my next course will be a course on that. Just, what are the pros and cons of writing a book, uh, self-publishing versus going with traditional publishers, and then just the steps of writing a book, brainstorming, outlining, editing, getting, content for a physical book or an ebook, and getting end to end. So that's what I've been up to and what I'm planning on doing.
Yeah, I think that's a cool topic. Like one of the things I'm, and maybe we'll collaborate something on that as well together. The just the the concept that's similar to this that I'm exploring over the next couple of years is that I think it would be cool to teach people not just about writing books and courses and other ways of generating revenue and prestige, or getting themselves out there, but in addition to that, also just like, what is the way that you can have a career where you don't have a boss? And I think there's all these really um, famous examples of people talking about, you know all the 0.00001% success stories of, like, oh, this guy, no, he went to Harvard, and he dropped out, and or X, or they got funding, and they and then that's this, you know at the top of the hill, though, there's a person who always wins, that is telling that story, right? There's a I think that's a really an interesting critical thinking skill, when someone, especially when they talk about money, is one of the first questions to ask anybody that gives you advice about money is how do you make money on me following your advice?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer with VC funding is, the venture capitalists always make money. You could you could basically risk your health. You could have kidney failure, cancer, obesity, alcoholism, whatever it is, divorces. They'll still make money. And I think that would be interesting to have a, just again, over the next few years, is, what if you said to those people no, and what if you actually made money without needing any of those shenanigans about compromising your health or believing in the lottery, approach. I mean, that actually is something I've been thinking about quite a bit, which is similar. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's in the spirit, which is, how do you tell people, here are ways to have an income stream where there isn't a human literally controlling you and telling you, you better do this and you better do this, and if you don't, I'll punish you. That I think is one of the most interesting things you could tell someone.
Yeah, and I think that that's sort of like a third path. I mean, if we broadly characterize, technical programmer data types like us as generally like you will work for a company, right? And if you want to get rich doing that, then you'll work for a big company and they'll pay you much of money, right? Otherwise, you will go this other route where you will start a company and you'll take a bunch of money for a moonshot that probably won't pan out, right? And those are like the two ways of like developers or whatever living their lives. And, I think both you and I are of the opinion that there's at least another way that requires you to be in control, right? And I don't know that that's necessarily for everyone. And I'm not saying that, like, you know, if you like working for a big company or if you like working 100 hours a week at the startup thing, more power to you. But I think there are, I guess, and it goes to the idea of like limiting your downsides and trying to maximize your upsides, right? Whereas I think going the VC route isn't necessarily trying to do that. It's um, having a lot of potential downsides with a very small chance at an upside.
Yeah, and the thing that I think is interesting about the the bootstrapped, I guess they could call it a bootstrapped entrepreneur route, which is what you and I do, is that there are skills that are different than venture capital funded companies. So I've worked in many VC funded companies, and what I think is interesting is that you don't learn how to generate revenue or sell products. And I had to kind of accidentally, at least one, and generate millions of dollars from zero. But in general, people don't. This is even, you don't learn this. I got an MBA. I've teach an MBA. They don't teach you how to make products and sell things and create revenue. that I think is one of the least talked about skills. And as soon as you start bringing it up, it's all gets into like, you know, weird Tony Robbins, you know, secret crystals and all kinds of weird stuff
Well, there's
where
also a stigma around marketing, right? Whereas most
yeah.
technical people are highly skeptical of marketing in that, you're trying to like trick them or fool them into giving them your money, and
Mhm.
the product should sell itself without any of that.
Well, it feels like if you could, I've actually been thinking of making revenue a lot like the way the human body works. I've been into this whole intermittent fasting thing lately, and or even the last several years. And there's basically the glycogen, right, where you can eat bread and French fries and fruit, and then your body just kind of sucks it up. And if there's too much, it just throws it right into your body as fat. And then there's the fat, which is basically your huge reserves of energy. And the typical person can walk from um, Florida to New York without eating a meal and can be completely healthy. Just drink some water. And as a entrepreneur, or even just not even calling yourself an entrepreneur, but like a person that if you can think of how do you build that same system that the human body built that's really smart. Your paycheck is like glycogen, right? It's like it's not really that helpful. It's
It can go away at any time.
it can go away at any time. But if you have 20 pounds of fat on your body, again, you can walk from Florida to New York and you're good. And I mean, I've actually been doing this lately, been trying like different kinds of fasts, mostly just for fun. But like, if you want to drop 10 pounds, just don't eat for a week. And it turns out there's zero problems with that. And there's nothing that happens wrong. Like you're designed to do that, is not eat for like days at a time. And so, if you can do the same thing the human body did from an evolutionary perspective and have fat reserves, right? So you can have a big pile of cash in the bank or revenue streams that are coming in, then it really changes the game. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck because you're eating the sugar, the
Yeah.
food that the people in your company give you, then it's similarly unhealthy. And I think that could be a whole, and I have a book that I'm working on that's that topic, but that could be a whole thing.
Yeah. No, that's definitely interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of synergies, to use an overused term there, about your thoughts and my thoughts around making a living. And yeah, I mean, pros and cons of being on your own, and sort of the flexibility and ability to do what you want when you want.
Well, I think to me the biggest thing, if I had to pick making a lot of money or I can wake up every day and just do what I want to do and work on whatever I want, it's a no brainer. I would rather wake up every day and do whatever I want. And that's
Mm.
when you have restructured your life so that you have many revenue streams and they're all it's just like I mean, really, I've been this I almost thinking of putting this in a book, but like the human body is a really good example of this. Like it can eat protein, it can eat fat, it can eat carbohydrates, and it can it can go a long time without eating. That's how you want to design your money. You don't want to have just like, I mean, imagine we would be pretty fragile if we could only we could only eat fruit and then there's no fruit, we die. Like that's how most people are generating income, is their equivalent. Like they're 0% body fat and they're eating fruit. And then as soon as the fruit dries up, they're dead. But instead, if you're able to have huge reserves or different long-term sources, then that's how you really can choose to work on fun stuff or spend your time writing a book. Like, I mean, I think that's a thing. If somebody wants to write a book, that everyone should have the opportunity to do is, what if you took 3 months off and just went to Hawaii or Montana or somewhere and just rented a place and there's just wrote a book? Why not? but you can't do that if the cash pressures are so high that you don't have that reserve. But it's like the ability to have revenue that's that's basically nonlinear, that's like just sitting around, allows you to make money that's that will then it's like it's a chicken and egg problem, in that the more you can generate revenue that's in the future, the more ability you have to generate money that's in the future. And that's part of the problem is, and that's why, maybe if they took your course on writing a book, that's a way to get started, right? Is that I call it points on the board. Is
Yeah. And it's also, I think, maybe a mindset issue of like, living day to day versus investing in the future. And I think it goes back to what we sort of talked about earlier, in that you need to take ownership in yourself and you need to invest in yourself, like the big nerd ranch, right? You asked your boss said no, and you're like, okay, well, I'm taking vacation next week, right? And so that was on you. You were going to do it versus your boss saying no, and you're like, oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, I won't do that, right? And so imagine, if you didn't choose to do that, drop that investment of $3,500 or whatnot, how your life would probably be different right now.
I mean, that one particular scenario, probably I would still be similar, but it was the mindset that I don't listen to what people tell me to do. That people all the time tell me that don't say this, don't do this, don't do this, and just no. I will do what I believe is in my long-term best interests. That's ethical. Like, I mean, it's one thing to say, if someone's like, "Hey, don't steal people's money," and then you're like, "No, I'll steal it." That's different than if it's ethical, and then someone, you know, like ethical non-compliance.
Sure.
I think is a great way to have autonomy in life.
Cool. Awesome. Well, with that, I think we've ran a little bit over our planned half hour, but do you have any parting thoughts before I go, or ideas or takeaways that you want to call to actions you have?
Well, yeah, one thing I was going to say is that I do think that, one thing that you're doing that is important to call out is that there's a lot of resources that are free or pirated or, everywhere. And a good example of this is Sam Harris. I don't know if anyone's ever listened to his podcast, but he has really interesting conversations about topics that are a lot of times like taboo topics intellectually, and they're pretty compelling. And then you listen to 45 minutes of it, and then he's like, hey, by the way, subscribe to my podcast if you want to hear this, because I need to make a living, and that's why I can do these podcasts. And then he said as well, look, email me, and I'll give you free access if you can't afford it, right? And I think that the kind of person who would listen to Sam Harris in particular is probably fairly intellectually curious person, gets it, the concept, which is that if you want to have people create incredible content for you, you need to pay for it. And I think that's, a good point with the stuff you did, is that people should support you. They should pay for the courses that you developed, because that means that you'll keep doing it. But the concept of like, I'm going to look for only free content, or, free, or which in a way is like self-defeating. It's like actually hurting the learner. So for me, that's my advice, is like, for people like Matt who are doing stuff that are independent, content creators, buy their stuff so that they keep doing it. And then likewise, I buy several books a week, actually, and I read multiple books a week. And anytime I find any content that's good, I'm a it's like paying taxes. Like, of course you should pay taxes, because then you have parks and you have all kinds of stuff. And I think it's a that's my advice, is reward people that work hard.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, so to your point, I wrote a blog post, I think 2 weeks ago, on a common question I get is, what is the best free course? And I think it sort of relates to that, should you pay for something? Should you invest in something? So I'll put a link to that in the chat here if people want to check out my thoughts on that. Yeah, my takeaway would be check out Noah's Nanodegrees if you're interested in the Azure space. Like I said, I personally think that that's I first of all, I don't think you can go wrong with the cloud right now, but I think um, I expect to see a lot of growth from Microsoft in that area just due to the nature of clients that I work with, who a lot of them tend to be on Windows for whatever reason. And that's where they're going to go in the cloud. And these might not be the big tech names you hear of, but these are sort of the companies that sort of rule the world. And I think Azure is a good place to go there. Um, Thanks everyone for listening, and uh, hopefully we can do this again soon sometime. Thanks for your time, Noah.
Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.